Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, Jacob Cooper, who's here to share with us his new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. So, Jacob holds a master's degree in social work, and he is a licensed clinical social worker. He also works as a certified Reiki master, certified hypnotherapist, and specializes in past life regression therapy. As a psychotherapist, Jacob works with individuals, groups, and families in managing emotional barriers, promoting improved wellness and resiliency. Jacob incorporates mindfulness and a spiritual approach to focus on the connection between the mind, body, and spirit. In effect, he teaches individuals how to improve their cognitive process and shift their perspectives. So let's welcome to the show, Jacob Cooper.
Thank you, Marianne. It's an honor to be back, here. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I feel the one that is just completely honored by having you here and to talk about your new book. What inspired you to write this?
It's a good question. I mean, my first book, Life After Breath, was, really a memoir of my NDE. So this is a way for me to introduce my story, to the community on a broader level. But the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder is a much different approach. This book is really more so of a teaching book and a book filled with lessons of my NDE. So it was an angle that I felt it was, needed to take. I really felt that I needed to have this, put out there. Something that I couldn't resist.
I can understand why. I mean, my goodness, your book was, I felt very transformative. And to really get these kind of messages at such a young age, can you just kind of share with our listeners that maybe didn't hear our last discussion about your NDE?
Of course. I had an NDE or near-death experience, September of 1993, when I was just the young age of 3 years old. At the time, I had pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, and I went to a playground and climbed up onto a ladder, onto a slide, and I lost all ability to breathe, and I slowly began to suffocate, and my whole body, was shut down due to suffocation. And my body wasn't working, so I was able to really get outside of my body, become aware of what was going on. In that moment, I just had an awareness of my physical body. And then I felt my brain deprived of oxygen, and I was able to look and feel my brain, and slowly I just felt my brain literally just large crack in half, and just almost like it just snapped in half. And, once my brain, you know, cracked in half, so to speak, that's when the spirit realm and God and awareness of the other side really took form. And so this was an incredible journey in which I was able to become aware of, in our vernacular, we call it the center of the universe or God or whatever it is that you want to place term on it. But to me, I was able to encounter awareness of God. I was able to have awareness of my own spirit guides, my loved ones on the other side, my soul family that I referred to as. I was aware of angels that was, all just in front of me. That were all just in front of me at this time, just floating right in front of me. Aware of my own past lives, what I would be doing in this life, and most importantly, the decision of staying on the other side or living, and really seeing my own past lives and what they were about and what I would be doing in this life, really was a big driving force for me to obviously choose yes. Otherwise, I probably would be coming through a medium on one of these shows or something like that. But I chose to stay, and the story is continuously being written each and every day. So that NDE, is something that happened to me, but each and every day the events never changed, but the meaning that I have and the integration of it, in this life is something that grows and grows each and every day beyond the NDE when it occurred.
Do you think that grows because of your age as you grow, or knowledge, or deepness into your own spiritual practice?
Well, there's a couple things at play. I mean, with my NDE, it's really congruent with research, NDE research, which will tell you that, it takes around 2 to 3 decades to fully integrate child or infant, NDEs. So for me, that's true. And it's not like I ever forgot what happened to me. But I would just say that I was able to ground it in this reality and was able to make sense of it. Um, and so, you know, when something happens to us, you know, there's a lot, the ND carried a lot of trauma to it that made it quite complex. But beyond this trauma, and later in my life, I've been able to, evolve through the trauma and find meaning from it as well. But age, certainly in the passage of time, could be, certainly, yeah. But I think, the more public that I get with it, the more inspired I am to find different angles to give it back to other people. I always say there's givers and takers, and I could have easily just taken this experience and just kind of, held on to it. And I had done that, for the majority of my childhood and teenage years, but I recognize the near-death experience isn't so much about myself, but about other people.
Well, while you're doing that through your teenage years and as you were a child, was that because you really needed to have that human experience?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't walk around going, "Oh, I had a near-death experience." I didn't even know what it was, what it was termed as. So, really, I credit, the work of my friend, Dr. Imamudi for coining that term because without that, it would be hard for us to get public as end ears. We just would be walking around talking about this thing without an actual term to it. So I think the term of it allows us to be empowered and to take ownership and to identify it for, to be a thing.
So,
But yeah.
no, no, go ahead.
Um, but I think really, you know, in Life After Breath, they really highlight a lot of the complexity of it, where I woke up from this NDE and just was reminded of a world that forgot about, the other side and their connection to it. It was very much a world that was very much the majority that I saw was forgetful. And so I recognized that even if I tried, they couldn't, understand at that time. And my father actually, recently said to me that I told him, after my NDE that I said, "Hey, Dad, remember when I was rushed by the ambulance to the hospital? Something happened that day. It's not going to make sense to you now, but one day you'll understand." And he recently just told me that. So, like I said, I'm gathering a lot more information about this as time passes, and the more that I'm able to go within and communicate it with people around me, actually, the better it's been. But the timing, I think, is everything.
It must be so just amazing to get those kind of messages of something you said and it's been not really remembered until it's been brought up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just gives me validation because I'm my own biggest skeptic of this, and it's just a part of me firmly believes it, but then I also have my human judgment. And I'm like, geez, I was only 3 and I saw this. It felt like a second ago, and so at times I thought I was maybe 4 or 5. I didn't think like it was possible for, and it was in preschool, but I'm like, geez, a 3-year-old to remember all this. So yeah, I mean, my parents have really helped to kind of even blow my mind that, wow, I was 3, because it felt like just a second ago when this happened, and it didn't feel possible that I would be that young and, have that clear detail of it, but it's obviously the case,
So did you go through a life review when you passed?
Yes, but my life review is different than some others. Not because I was so young and there wasn't very little life, because I think life isn't so much the years of your life, but rather the life within those years. And so, yeah, even at 3 years old, I was able to really, see a depth of my experience. And you could know someone and it could feel like an eternity, and you could live a couple days in this world, and that could be filled with beauty and depth too. So, but it was also I was able to notice myself through what others thought about me, but beyond that, my life review also included, a recent past life, that I had, and some other past lives that I experienced too. So it wasn't just this life. I was able to become aware, particularly, of my last life that I lived. So, you know, it's rare because I think a lot of people, when you talk about life reviews, they just see this lifetime. But I was able to have life reviews of other, lifetimes before this one, which, isn't so common to hear. Past lives and NDEs. You would think it would be the case, but it's not always, that you see in encounters.
I rarely hear of those type of experiences. And what did you learn about your past lives?
Well, particularly my last lifetime, that I say from completion we begin, with past lives when it comes to this life, and there's parallels, or there are parallels with some of our past lives and the ones that we're living. Not all of our past lives have strong ties and parallels to our current. Some have stronger influence, but and in relationship to this lifetime. But my last lifetime has a very strong relationship to my NDE, I firmly believe, because my last lifetime, I was able to really see a life in which, I, you know, the term that I use is I had a death by suicide, but there really is no death. But that lifetime, I even in my NDE and post NDE, I was able to really see, how I felt, just completely deprived of life force, and just I felt like my back was against a wall and there was no hope, and I was just very much cornered, in that lifetime. And I chose to end the pain and suffering and um, of that lifetime. But then I was able to really have a knowing of how my NDE was related to that, because I just in my NDE I felt very similar when I was suffocating, in my near death experience, and there was nothing to hold on to, and I was just felt like, oh my God, here we go again. But then remembered, with my NDE, by just kind of letting go of that pain and just allowing myself to transcend past that pain and to use all this beautiful love and force around me, that I was able to survive even death. Um, and I recognize that death of the body is real, but death of the soul is a fiction, that can never die. And and when when I completed suicide, and I speak about this in the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, that I want to preface that there is no judgment, on suicide. There's no punishment. There's only love and acceptance and healing that does come through that. And I remembered myself, being accepted, being loved, and crossing over, while at the same time knowing that, when I was going through what I was going through, you know, if I had remembered what was inside of me, I probably would have been able to transcend what I was going through.
Did you really kind of discover your life purpose at that time?
I think I discovered or remembered, why I'm here. But, in my NDE, what really reminded me of why I was here was when I was able to see what I would be doing in this life. And I just remembered in my NDE that I saw myself speaking in front of a lot of people and just kind of sharing this message, if you will. And that was a great impetus for me to stay, because I just, looking back in it, I just remembered that the other side is always going to be there. But this was a unique window that I had, and I had to decide, you know, very clearly and quickly. But by seeing, that heaven was not a destination that we go to, but rather something that we can embody over there and over here, that I'm like, all right, why wait for it? Why not bring it over to other people? And so, really others is why, other people, and bringing it to them is why is the biggest reason why I stayed. But I think my near-death experience and NDEs in general could be so versatile, and how they could relate to other people's lives. It's at least for my NDE, it's a playbook where you're going through an intense period, whether that be grief or losing a loved one, like I said, or just going through intense depression or, feelings of not fitting in, not wanting to be here, you know, in those dark moments, especially in those dark moments, is when we're able to allow ourselves to surrender, to this greater light, this greater force within, and we could transform ourselves by letting go in a way and allowing this greater power within to be with us, during those moments.
From your near death experience, what did you discover the essence of our soul is?
Well, it's a great reminder that, you know, you could technically bury a body, but you can never technically bury our essence. It could feel buried by life circumstances, certainly, but, by burying a body does not mean that the soul goes with that body underground. And I found that there's a big power in the box of reality as we see it. Um, I talk a little bit about, the beginning of Wisdom, Jacob's Ladder, that our reality is largely defined with how we view and see ourselves. And if we see ourselves as just solely a body, it's rational to understand why, afterlife would be an irrational belief system, where if that's all that we are and we're bearing that, how could it be that there's, you know, life after that, right? But if you are able to have a knowing, that there's more of you than just a physical body, there gives wiggle room, for something more to exist, beyond even our own death. So, the death of the body. But so I think the box of reality is very important. The difficult part, though, is the unknown. And since almost day one, death for many is the greatest unknown. And I think a lot of people will be comfortable knowing what they know, but they will push away what they don't know many times. And so death is treated the same way. But I think for the daring ones who are able to explore their bounds of what they know, they could find, that they could have great benefits in their life and they could have a great relationship and even make friends, with the afterlife and death itself.
In your book, you share about how all humans are sacred beings. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have to decide where we come from and who we are. Um, many times when we see someone, who's evil or negative, um, so much of that is I feel that hurt people, in a way. Um, but some, have a category, but I think at our core, we all come from, the divine. That's where we originate from. But sometimes our identity gets overtaken by a darkness and we forget who we are. And that to me is hell. Hell isn't found when you cross over. Hell could be found when you're separate from that, and really disconnected from the source of who we are. And so, I know Dr. Wayne Dyer would always use this reference, but in a lot of his talks, but it's like you take an orange, you squeeze that orange out, you get, orange juice. And we have to think like what happens if we squeeze out our essence? What is there? And at least to me, I remember that there's, unconditional beauty, infinite beauty in all of us at our core, beyond some of the surface. And so, I think if we remember that as who we are, we'll act in accordance with it. But if we see ourselves as a damaged good, or if life circumstances, happen that overtake that part of ourselves, the life and world that we experience will overtake our soul and our identity, versus our soul and identity being able to overtake life circumstances that we go through.
I think what's just empowering in your book is how you share that we can have that joy and connection here right now, where I think a lot of people think that's something that they will get later if they're good.
Right. Well, I think that's a lot of cultural programming and myth that in order to earn something that you need to do something, and that we just need to just live a lifetime in order to get the grand prize, and that's through a lot of cultural and religious upbringing, which is largely very disempowered. From day one, it's kind of like we're sin people and we need to perfect ourselves. We need to work on ourselves. We're imperfect as we are, and we're not good enough just as we are. And so that really comes from a lot of models of parenting and our experiences here on Earth. But I found in my NDE that's not very much in sync with truth at its core. And I think at its core, we are good enough. We are beautiful. We are so much more than we could possibly imagine. So it isn't so much earning that, but rather embodying that, and allowing that memory to shine itself in the lives that we live, to remember who we really are is the greatest treasure of life. And that is not something that needs to be found at the end, but rather it could be something that is explored and found right here, right now, in a declaration in this moment.
I think that's so empowering for so many people who want to view life in a way as we are spiritual beings here. And I think it gives us greater purpose when we look at it that way.
Well, absolutely, Marianne. Um, because there's, and as a therapist, maybe we could get into this a bit later, but I always view that there's the two roads of life in front of us, that we have each day, the lower road of viewing the situation, and the higher road of viewing the situation. And the wisdom of Jacob's ladder is very much it acknowledges, the low road, but it also really focuses on the high road, which is, what's the greatest and highest way that I could view, this life and this situation. And each and every day is another way to extend that. If we totally get there, then what's the point of entering tomorrow? Each and every day is another way to see it, differently in a broader perspective. But I think there's two roads that we could take. We could feel very easily, tortured by this human experience, or felt like a victim, or just feel like this is an endless pit of pain that we experience. That could be one way, and I could see that way on a surface value. But the other way that we could see this is, how we're able to transcend all things in this experience, particularly pain. The term that you hear with a lot of people thrown out there, that life is a school, which I think school has a lot of trauma for a lot of people and negative association. But I just say it's a beautiful opportunity that we have to be a greater expression of who we are, and to really find the beauty beyond the surface, and experience that could impact our own lives here and our own eternity, with embodying awareness, each step of the journey.
In your book, you talk about the illusion of loneliness. And I'd love for you to share about that with us because it seems like a lot of people are feeling really lonely about now.
Right. Well, I don't know if loneliness has really so much to do with the people around ourselves, as there could be people with very few social support, but they feel connected, but people with a lot of people around them and they feel isolated. And so I think loneliness has a lot to do, or lack thereof, with connection to ourselves and the world, inside of us and around us. I think there's a beautiful saying that says, if you like the person that you're dwelling with or living with, how could you ever be alone? And so I think a lot of it is learning how to be comfortable with ourselves, to love ourselves, to enjoy ourselves, but also to feel a sense of connection, to the world inside of us and outside of us too. And if we remembered how much we are loved and how much support we have by those around us, how could we ever feel fragmented or isolated, with the amount of force and power with those on the other side around us? So I think people forget who they are and how much force is behind them at each step of the journey. And some people just feel very disconnected from that and they just feel as solo agents living this life. And that might be something that they see, but it's not true in the relative. And I think if people were just to be remembered of how much love is around them, inside of them at all times, it would be very hard to feel alone on this journey, because we just remembered how connected we are and how much more we are beyond just ourselves on this path. There's a lot more connections just beyond ourselves, our identity, and how we see our egos and our personalities in this life.
Do you think you have that knowledge of the differences between, when someone reaches a point of absolute despair and loneliness, I'm doing air quotes on that, to where you are today because of the past life experiences you had?
Well, the NDE, was a great reminder, of that, and past lives as well too. But the NDE really informed me, of my true reality. And this reality is not to say that it's not real. In the moment it is, but there's a greater reality than just this one. I think this is something that we're experiencing, but it's this life is not the ultimate reality. So it reminded me of the ultimate reality, where how um, I could experience, things in this lifetime, but this isn't all that there is. And even, you know, I think on a human level, we all need support. We all need people around us. I think there's a part of our brain that really needs those social networks. But you know, if we don't have that, experience, if we have times where we're deprived of that, we could also tap inward and we could really connect to a lot of love inside of us and support, around us. So, in moments of my life of when I just had great despair, I was able to remember that. I mean, for instance, there was a dark moment in my teenage years in which my later teenage years, when I was, or probably early 20s, later teenagers, when I was just asked to leave my house because I was being a jerk, whatever, just for like a couple of days, and I just, was the moment just kind of like sobbing and crying, and I just felt, so disconnected from life, and then I guess subconsciously walked around the corner of my home and I was found myself in a playground and I just was sobbing uncontrollably and I just remembered how the playground was here once again. And in my NDE, I had a near-death experience in a playground. And here it is, 2 decades later almost, right in front of me. And it was just a great reminder that this earth is not our home. We're here temporarily, but we all are children's in God's playground and we all really belong to that. So even if, life circumstances, kind of boot us out or kick us out, we still, belong to a greater reality at hand.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. I just think you come from such a unique perspective that, yeah, it would help a lot of people who maybe are feeling like they have no hope right now.
Yeah. A lot of people, I think everyone at a certain point goes through that. We all go through that. But, if you look at anyone with any degree of influence, um, we sometimes look at, the tip of the iceberg, but we forget, all of those, adversive experiences that made them who they are today, whether that's, Oprah or teachers like Eckhart Tolle, Neil Donald Walsh, whoever we kind of see today, even I mentioned Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was in and out of orphanages as, as a young child. They tap into something deeper, the pain that they go through allows them to tap in this doorway of something deeper. Um, and without that pain that they might have experienced, they may not have gone as deep as they did and tap into something a lot deeper and stronger than their own, painful experiences that they encountered.
That's like the fork in the road, looking at something from a higher purpose as opposed to maybe how our brains usually like to take things in a negative way.
Yeah, and it really does run in parallel with my work as a therapist, where I really work with clients on, if you're familiar with, cognitive behavioral therapy or, in a sense, part of cognitive behavioral therapy is cognitive reframing, which, you know, is almost kind of like a Buddhisty um, kind of way of life where, we're having an experience and what we feel that perception of what we encounter is our whole reality. And so, in other words, very little of life has to do with what actually happened to us. The majority of life has to do with how we process those experiences. And, you know, that was the impetus behind my books in a way where I didn't want to be defined by the stories of my life, but I wanted to be the author of those stories and to write those stories. That's how we live a very empowered life.
I think that that's is so empowering to look at life that way. And, in your book, you talk about grief. So, how
Mm.
does grief tie into all of this?
Ties in on a very close perspective. I mean, particularly with the work that I do. I mean, in the past have worked very closely with, or on an organizational level with the Forever Family Foundation, places like Helping Parents Heal. Recently I was a speaker for National Lookup Day, which is, we had over 100 participants, for that, but it's a day where, we kind of bring awareness to overdose addiction. And this particular group, I work with families who have, unfortunately lost loved ones to, overdose, suicide, addiction that I dealt with. But um, grief works very closely with the work that I do because, I believe, that there's two avenues with grief that we could work with. I think grief is very much of the human experience, but on the inner level, the soul does not grieve. I think the soul has a knowing that the loved one is right there with them at a deep level. And so I think grief is, very much in a way a human thing, but at our core, it's not something that we experience. And so I found that two things could be true at the same time, that you could believe in the afterlife with every fiber of your being, but you could also allow yourselves to be human and grieve properly. And I think grief is a great gateway to really expand ourselves, to really expand our awareness and transform our lives too, if done properly. But I think belief is a great tool to work with grief and at a certain point, but not immediately. I think we have to allow ourselves to process loss, no matter what we know, in our own pace. Because many times, especially within our world, there's a fixation on, just, kind of like the next play at hand. We're always about, what's next, what's next. That's just, you know, it's very trendy, our world. And so, that works in a very different way with how grief was intended to be, where um, you know, there is a flow to grief, there is a rhyme and a reason to it, and it's something that is embedded in us, and it's just a natural reaction. And so I think we have to allow our emotions, which I find to just stand for energy in motion, to run their course and to not get in its way. But I found that the most distressing grief happens with over time if we continuously have this box of our loved one, and the perception of a loved one just 6 feet under the ground, and that's all that we see. And, that's when it could really escalate. And so if we have a box that might allow ourselves to view that loved one in a different place or a different relationship and a continuity of their, life experiences, we could have a different relationship. And the word death just means a complete ending. And, that's not reflective really of what our loved ones are going through. There's not a complete ending, nor is it a reflection of the possible relationships that we could have with them. And so I think if we allow ourselves to have a relationship with our loved one, beyond their physical death, that could be a tool to assist and support, grief, I think.
In your experience, where do people tend to get stuck in grief?
Um, I think a lot of it is just not allowing themselves to go through the emotions or to just try to bypass their experiences and just, you know, push it down. I think that's when people get stuck. Um, and it's a very extreme example, very extreme. But, for instance, if you were to walk into a prison and just ask, how many of you had a traumatic loss next to you or someone very close to you, pass away before you expected, and I guarantee there's a lot of people in the prison that would probably raise their hand. And the reason why I say that is, unprocessed or unresolved grief could lead to an immense amount of pain, of anger, and as I said before, people who are feeling pain or people who are feeling hurt don't know what to do with those emotions, so they just kind of implode on others, and that impacts their life. And so I think the most dangerous part of grief is when we don't have the support system around us and we don't properly process it. And I have a feeling if a lot of people were to be able to get the support that's needed to process their own grief, that could be helpful because in the stages of grief, anger is a big one. I know Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was very pioneering in being able to be really the first one to talk very openly about grief and made it like a household name and normalized a lot of the different stages. One of the flaws was that there was a linearity to some of those stages, and so the 5 stages of grief could be very much interchangeable. Um, whether that's denial, bargaining, depression, anger, and acceptance, some of those stages. But um, and I speak about in my book how, really the 5 stages has been evolved to a 6th stage, which, I know David Kessler, who's really taken over the foundation, speaks about meaning and how when we're going through grief, there could be um, a meaning that we have from not only that person's life, but we could have more meaning in our own lives, at the other side of grief.
Thank you for taking the time to explain that. I think it's just such an important piece as we move through what we're grieving because I've gone to places where I've been stuck. I know other people probably have as well. So it's nice to be able to understand that there's a place to move beyond that.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, when I'm going through grief, the last thing that I don't know about you, the last thing I want to do is to be lectured, though, right? I don't look at any videos or, usually very early on in my grief. Um, you know, and all this stuff that we speak of is helpful at a certain point in our grief journeys. There's different stages. But early on in our loss, I think what's important is that people just want to be heard and held. They want to be understood. They want to be able to express themselves, you know, in a way that just allows themselves to express themselves and not, to be interfered with or to be spoken to or spoken at.
Yeah, I understand completely. I think there's a place where there's a realization. It's like, okay, I've been grieving for 3 years or 2 years, or whatever that case is, and the wanting to move beyond that, I think, can be very powerful for people.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's very sensitive. It's very delicate because a lot of people around us really want to help us, but they more times than not will do the things that are most unhelpful for grief, just kind of saying, oh, he or she is in a better place. Well, that might be true. We are not, so many times it's not so much that there's life after death, but are we able to find life after their death? That's the question that people face with grief. How could we live? You know, we may know that they're okay, but how could we be okay? Um, and many times we feel like there's a sense of guilt that we have that, how could, there's survivor's guilt, obviously that happens, but it's not right for us to enjoy our lives without our loved ones next to us. But once we're able to really understand, you know, the afterlife a little bit better and what our loved ones are really doing there, we could process grief in another way. And so I a friend of mine who endorsed my book, her name is, Alison Dubois, great, celebrity medium, but she um, has a saying that I really love where she talks about how we view loved ones that cross over and they have their afterlife experience. But sometimes we forget that we are their afterlife. The lives that we live is the afterlife that our loved ones experience. They're very connected to our lives over here. And so I think the greatest thing that we could do is to live for them, have our lives to be a dedication to them, have an undeniable continuity of our life that could tell us that that person that we love isn't in the lives that we live is an undeniable imprint of their lives. So I think that's what we could do too.
I really like looking at it that way. I think it really empowers a lot of people and gives people permission to move through grief.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes we're looking up at them, but they're also looking up at us too, and they're very connected to us. And yeah, it's and I've been through a lot of and I do a lot of workshops with a lot of mediums. We work very closely together, mediums and I, because it's it's all different pieces of evidence that people could have, that hopefully will strengthen their faith to their belief to faith to knowing of an afterlife, through different angles of evidence. But when mediums come through, it's oftentimes I hear loved ones saying, "I want you to live. I want you to enjoy your life. Really, you're here and enjoy life, and I want you to live." They want us to um, live our life and to understand that they're always with us, and they want us to have permission to continue and move forward.
Now, when you went through your experience, did that move you to a place of higher intuition?
Undeniably so. I mean, with NDEs, there's tremendous after effects, but one of those after effects is intuition, mediumistic capabilities. There's so many mediums out there who have had NDEs as well. People who work as professional evidential mediums or intuitives. But absolutely, even to this day, I'm not a certified professional intuitive or medium, but I still have a lot of, intuitive qualities that I utilize, my clinical work, as well as my work as a healer. But sometimes people think of just intuition on just a micro level where you're just reading someone in front of you. But to me, intuition has different levels, and I view my intuition now more and more as more of on a teaching level, more on a macro level. And so, you know, sometimes we say, "Oh my God, I'm not psychic, I'm not intuitive because I can't read this person or I can't give this person messages." But we could be intuitive and psychic in our own way with the wisdom that we're able to give over to others or the insights that we have or the downloads that we have. And so that's where I more see myself as more of, someone who just kind of gives over some of these universal downloads. And I do that on a daily basis, but also, particularly my second book is very much a channeled work. And so I believe for all of us, the quieter we become, the more we could really hear. And that's what I try to do each and every day, where I'm just, you know, allow my mind to be a parachute to be open. And that's how it really works. And that's how I could have information coming through me. But my NDE just really was a great reminder of how there's a difference of the brain and the mind. They're not the same. And when my brain, was deprived of oxygen, there was this whole other mind that continued. And that just reminded me that we just have these higher awareness, the subconscious mind, the superconscious mind as well too, that could be integrated in our everyday life.
Well, you mentioned something I'd like to ask a question on. So, do you feel like, with your experience, that our soul is housed more within the body and the brain, or how do you feel that that all is connected?
It's a very good question. I think the more that we connect to um, our innermost self, the more that we could relate to our higher mind. Our innermost self, is connected to our higher mind. A lot of people are very connected just on a mental perspective. They're just kind of constantly recycling thoughts, and that's how they live their lives. And so I think if we allow ourselves to be open, we could allow this higher awareness to come through in our lives. It's always coming through. We just have to be able to listen to it, to acknowledge it, to respect it. But some people they'll push it away because it's not, something that they've ever done, or it's not something that they trust. So they kind of push away those nudges or those thoughts that they may have. But if we're able to really trust, sometimes, this wisdom flowing through us, we could have a life that doesn't come solely from us, but rather a life that comes through us. And that's really a connected life. Sadly, a lot of people will just continuously be a recycled version of their own thoughts and their own perspectives of reality. So I think each and every day, if we live a connected life, we could allow our version of ourselves to constantly be broader by our ability to integrate, downloads and intelligence and wisdom that's constantly moving through us.
Is that something that everyone's connected to, regardless if they are in places where they feel shame and disconnect?
Especially in those places, yes. I think um, storms aren't there to break us, but they're there in many ways as shake-up periods for us to tap into something deeper. You know, I know we have a term near-death experience or, you know, spiritual transformative experience, shared death experience, and all those things. But to me, I look at all these experiences one and the same, where we have, these shake-up experiences in our life, through these difficult moments, and we could allow ourselves to tap into something deeper. And many of those moments are just kind of shakeups of our life. They're kind of like wake up calls of the soul. And if we're able to tune into something deeper beyond, those moments of trauma and pain, we could really expand. So, but I think, as I said before, the quieter become, the more that we can really listen and hear, is true. So, I think if people are really able to practice, different forms of meditation, or they're able to really, get in touch with themselves, to recognize that I have my thoughts, I have my emotion, I have my body, but those are all things that I experience. But there is a you beyond the you, that there is something more beyond myself, just as a thinker or a thought. And if you're able to do that, you know, you're able to have a lot more awareness in your life and tap into something greater. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the most influential people in in the new age spiritual world, many times they're very often simple people in the human perspective. I mean, Edgar Casey, for instance, lived the life, who was a great um, trans-channeling intuitive, I think the most well-known modern-day intuitive that we've had in American soil. But, he was very much kind of like a simple man, but he tapped into this greater, collective consciousness and this greater awareness. Um, and so it just reminds me how no one is really simple. We may live our lives simply, but we all are deeply wise and deeply complex, you know, at a fundamental level.
I love your last chapter. You are already what you are looking for. Can you can you expand on that for our listeners?
Yeah. Well, it's not saying that we're used to. Um, from in many ways of our lives, we're taught in schools that there's assignments in life, there's tasks in life, and our lives doesn't stop like that. We're always just constantly focusing on the task in front of us, what we need to do day to day. But sometimes we lose sight of the assignment and task from a broader perspective of the soul. And that is, to me at least, to really remember who we are. Because in our lives from day one, we're taught that in order to, be something, we must do something. We must do something great. We must get that great grade, that great house, that great car. That will really determine who we are. But what happens when that car is gone, that house is gone, that job is gone? Then what are we? Because all those things will be gone. No one is coming out of this life, fully alive physically. We all, have our expiration date with the body.
I really appreciate the time that we've been able to share here, Jake. I mean, you're such a gift, and it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
If anyone is interested in contacting me, you could reach me at my website at www.jacoblcooper.com. That's jacoblcooper.com. And you could find me through a multitude of social media links, social media outlets. I'm on TikTok, Facebook Professional, as well as Instagram, but it's all under Jacob Cooper LCSW. That's Jacob Cooper LCSW. And you could also find my books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom Jacob's Ladder, primarily through Amazon. But also, if anyone is interested, I'm going to be in Lilydale, which is really the center of spiritualism, in the US at least. And it's right by Buffalo, New York. I'm going to be there on August 8th, if anyone is interested.
Oh, that sounds like a great event to be part of. Well, I'll make sure that we get that information. Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for having me on as a return guest. You're a doll. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jacob. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Make sure to visit Jacob's website at Jacob L. Cooper for more information on his book and his upcoming event. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.